Now, today, the 8th of March, is International Women's Day. The theme this year, Inspire Inclusion. An issue that's important perhaps now more than ever in the context of conflict in various parts of the world. Two major wars are currently raging, one in Europe, one in the Middle East. Both largely exclude women as peace negotiators. Tensions between Russia and Ukraine came to a head nearly a decade ago during Crimea's annexation, as several peace talks were held from 2014 to 2019. The Ukraine's delegation then included 2 women. The Russian team was all male. Observers say little has changed since Russia's invasion of Ukraine 2 years ago. In the Middle East, the women have been a part of the dialogue in the war between Israel and Hamas, but they remain underrepresented, with 6 women ministers in Israel and an unreported number of women in the male-dominated Hamas militant group. Now, closer to home, women have often been left out of peace talks resolving around the long-running civil war in Myanmar. In 2015, only 6% of negotiators were female. In recent years, that has plateaued to a little more than 15%. The crisis in Afghanistan is also a stark reminder of female exclusion. Nearly 70 rounds of talks were held between 2005 and 2020, and less than a quarter of them included women. During the 2020 intra-Afghan talks, only 4 out of 42 negotiators were women. And since the Taliban takeover in 2021, the UN says that women are also being erased from public life. There are no female members in the cabinet. Women have also been forbidden from most workplaces, from receiving an education beyond primary school, and from leaving their house without a male chaperone. Now, we are now joined by Sarah Hendriks. She's a Director of Programs, Policy, and Intergovernmental Section at UN Women. Thank you very much for joining us, Sarah. A growing number of research and case studies reveal how women's participation, whether in negotiating roles or through this grassroots efforts, contributes to reaching peace agreements. How does gender matter?
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Gender matters so much. It matters because it is actually women who are affected by and living in conflict-affected settings all across the world. In fact, what we've seen is that women living in conflict has increased by more than 50% since 2017. That number now stands at around 614 million women right around the world. I cannot think of a time when women's role in peace was more critical than it is now.
Sarah, could you give us some example of, when the presence of women in peace processes sort of influence conflict prevention or resolution of conflicts, and what sort of lessons can be learned from there?
Yeah, what we've seen is that women, when they are at the peace table, peace is more sustainable. It is more durable. We see that peace, when women are included, actually creates the conditions for both development and peace to be retained. Right now, however, amongst the peace processes that UN Women has led, or that the UN has led or co-led, it stands at only 16%. So what we're seeing right now is an insufficiency of women at the peace table. We do know in places as far-reaching from Afghanistan to Myanmar that it is so important for women who constitute half the population of the world to actually be present, that there can be no peace when women as mediators, as negotiators, or signatories are not in itself part of the process.
All right, Sarah. So we have the evidence, which you just cited. We have a UN Security Council Resolution 1325 as well. So why don't we have those, why don't we have the women needed in top leadership positions or top conflict management and peacemaking roles? I mean, why are we here? And is there anything that can be done about it?
That's such a great question. There are so many barriers to women's direct participation in peace and political processes. These are very multifaceted. They include the ways in which decision-making is quite male-dominated, the ways in which there are social norms and cultural biases that are driven by misogyny. I'd like to draw attention also to how women's organizations themselves, who do such critical peace-building work, are underfunded. They are underfunded to drive peace. In fact, and this is a very important data point, only 0.3% of all bilateral aid actually goes to supporting feminist or women-led or women's rights organizations or movements that are working in conflict-affected and fragile settings. So to change this calculus, to change this situation, we need to fund civil society organizations, including women's human rights defenders and peace builders themselves.
Could you give us some examples of specific strategies that can be implemented or proved effective to increase meaningful participation of women in peace processes?
So I think sometimes, this has to do with what we set out to do, how we measure what we set out to do. So to see the change in peace negotiations, we must set ambitious and measurable targets for women's direct participation so that women actually are on delegations, they are on the negotiation teams. We must nominate and appoint women as the actual lead mediators, as the experts in peace mediation. We can also set goals for gender balance in terms of the inclusion of gender expertise as a norm for mediation teams. We can also track and report publicly and in real time on the number and percentage of women who directly participate in these peace processes and really ensure that gender equality and women's human rights are central to peace agreements.
Sarah, I want to circle back to what you mentioned earlier about some of the social and cultural, if you like, challenges in terms of having more women involved in peacemaking. And if we look at, what's happening around the world right now, we have what's happening in the Middle East, in Africa, in Asia. So again, I want to ask you whether or not social and cultural aspects, are the key and perhaps main issues which prevent greater participation?
I think you're absolutely right. I think that social norms and the ways in which gender inequality plays out in terms of mindsets and behaviors has a lot to do with seeing women as a valuable and recognized voice and participant at the peace table. We see in conflicts as far-ranging as Afghanistan, the Middle East, in Myanmar, across the world, that it shows that we need to recognize women's voices, but we need to do so in a way that recognizes their value.
Right.
And when their value isn't seen as a legitimate voice, as a legitimate actor to drive forward a peace process, then we aren't even at the starting line.
All right.
And I think there we need to shift the calculus altogether.
All right, Sarah, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there for now, but thank you very much for coming on the show. We've been speaking with Sarah Hendriks, the Director of Programs, Policy and Intergovernmental Section at UN Women. Thank you very much.